Okay. That is so bloody annoying. Okay. So you guys can hear me on YouTube now? Derivar, say something.
I was just checking something right now.
Okay, yeah. So if you guys can hear Derivar say something in chat, and Derivar will watch. And then, so basically, just a real recap for the people that are watching on YouTube was the idea is basically drilling down their movement and getting it to where they understand they need to stay together as a group, and that where they would separate normally, they won't, and they'll try and stay together as one big group, like this right here. We're in, well, those guys, those two just failed. Now they're gonna have to be. Now we're gonna have to figure out the use case where they did fail. But the idea is like trying to keep them together and having fallback positions. But you can see when you get to larger numbers, there's a lot more inconsistencies and going back and forth, back and forth. And those are situations where we need to eradicate those instances. And like this is a good example where like the system should have failed these spots, invalidated them, and put them back here. Because now this entire left wing is dead. Because Chelsea decided to basically hit your left wing that was isolated. So it's one of those things where it's like we're kind of testing and making like these little like small arenas where we're trying to figure out where they fail and where they succeed, and then we're going back and we're iterating and adjusting and tweaking the algorithm for the let me get the exact technical term. It's called the, let me make sure I quote this correctly for what Derek calls it. It's called, hold on, I've seen it in his reports channel. It's like the sure something. I'll have to come back to that maybe. I'll have to scroll through it when Efren's talking later, because I can't find it in his channel. But it's like a way of calculating and minimizing movements, and it's like a common like mathematical algorithm that a lot of RTS games use. But we have to basically build on it and improve the algorithm so it understands like don't hyper optimize movement in some cases, because they need to basically like they need to move. They need to, move more than we would normally allot them. So then that way they can be in a position where they're not set up to fail to die in gameplay. Or an example would be is like right here, where like those two shouldn't have gone up there. The system should have basically have folded the formation system in and put them back here dynamically. So those are the kind of edge cases that we're working on to basically try and like solve those kind of issues where they just kind of act really stupid. Oh, that guy decided to jump off the ramp. That was another thing that we kind of like prototyped with this thing, is using more nav links. So AI understand they can jump off of inclines to basically like just their default transit movement. So that was something else that just kind of got snuck in with this formation system. It's just making sure it supports that. But obviously you don't want like three guys just going off in the middle of nowhere just doing that. So there has to be some intentionality of like if the entire formation decides they're going to do it, then they're going to do it. And you can see like if I test another formation, which is like diamond, and I tell them to basically move through here, they'll reform. And that's another issue that we're seeking to eradicate, is sometimes it tells them to reform in a bad normalized location. And basically what we do is that when they are moving in a formation, we try and normalize all of their points and then find the best, most optimal point. But we need to also have like a bias where it basically determines like, oh, you guys are so out of formation. You guys are so far away. We're going to ignore you. We're going to form based off of where 90, 80% of the units are. And then we're going to basically ignore the other 20 to 30%, and they have to run to catch up to get into their position. So an example of that would be like this, where like the system should not jump back and try and approximate a location back here. Those units should be ignored. These units should form up. These units should run the catch up kind of deal. So those are like the edge cases that we're just kind of working on to essentially like if I do it, like they're not going to know to run. It did a pretty good job. It shouldn't have pushed them forward as much as it did. But it's one of those things where it's like, we're just kind of going through and just kind of eradicating these edge cases and whatnot.
That was smooth.
It was okay. Like you figure
how they kind of just merged in with the group. I like that.
Yeah, but it's the fidgeting that I hate, and then it's basically just the what am I thinking of? It's the fidgeting, and then it's the accuracy of movement, where it's like it needs to understand more edge cases, or like this, where it knows like all these points are now invalidated. They should have been back here, kind of deal. because at least they're now able to better protect each other. But that's a very complicated system to write, so it's going to be a lot of like back and forth as we just kind of test systems and just kind of get everything ironed out. Because the whole point of this entire cleanup, this whole junction of like, okay, we need to audit and clean up the game is to make it light years better than what it was before. It's not to do the same thing again and then just have the same problems kind of deal. So that's what I'm kind of keen on this time around, is to just kind of like make sure that like, okay, if we need to spend a couple of extra days on the formation system, we're going to spend a couple of extra days on the formation system to make sure that it is robust and it's adaptable and it's not going to piss people off by putting people in situations to fail. Because again, nobody wants to fight the game. You want to fight the infected. And if the information system or the building system are in contest, basically like the gameplay loop, you got a problem. So you figure like we were hoping we'd be done with the formation system 2 to 3 days ago, but enough, I guess you can say, I guess you could say edge cases and situations presented itself to where we needed to basically spend the time to iron this system out. So yeah, there's that aspect. This is all replicated. This is all co-op. So everything is tested on both sides. So I won't like bring up a second viewport right now because you figure like it just looks kind of ugly. But the idea is that when he's programming this, it's already set up to work with co-op. All he's doing is finessing and tweaking the code and making it more optimal within the confines of the box he's established of how the formation system replicates. So there's that. What did you say?
Sorry, go
on. So what do you want to hit on next? You want me to move on to the building system?
Just real quick to touch base on the formation thing. When they do the little follow the leader thing, you see them kind of move around a little bit. Is there any plan to sort of touch base on that and make sure that the guy at the front is always the guy at the front?
That's the idea of that algorithm I talked about, where I can't remember the damn abbreviation, but the idea is that it tries to keep people in their key position that they were in previously and minimize movement. But there are some situations where that should fail. Like what I mentioned, where like there's an object that's blocking, is that like this guy's position is now on a wall. So he should understand that like he needs to go here over there, or like here in this formation, just so he can at least help provide some security. And he doesn't run around, go up a ramp, come up here, and now he's on this elevated position where the other 99% of the formation is on the ground floor. So like that would be an example where I would to have Derek disregard that algorithm and do something custom, but it's going to be on a per case basis as we test and tweak and alliterate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So do you want me to move on to the building system, or did you want to jump over to Alcatraz?
Let's cover the building system first, so especially the queuing stuff.
Excellent. All right. So my goal going into this week was to basically take what we learned from Legacy and just do it better and improve a lot of things that basically didn't have a lot of fail safes and were very error prone, as you guys can see in reviews and what people talk about on the discussion forums. So these are my 4 engineers, my 4 builders. And essentially, I'm going to show single and multi-queued building. So over the course of the last 24 hours, is also why we started a little bit later, is I did just some last minute tweaks just to make sure it was presentable based off of some tweaks that came in last minute, is you can now place all the structures, well, the majority of them. The only ones that are missing are the wall builders. Like the ones that, like you sandbags and conventional walls and, all that fun stuff. And essentially, I'll be phasing into that, ideally going into Monday, Tuesday, once I'm happy with this builder queue system that I've constructed here. And it essentially does like a bounds-based check. A bounds is basically a approximation of an object that determines if you render the object or not. Think of it as like a box around every object. Actually, I can visualize that. And the idea is it gets the bounds, those little red boxes that you see, and it essentially uses that to determine where they should look and where they should move. The previous system in Legacy used 9 pre-placed points in local space. So a level designer or some poor designer would have to go in for every individual structure we ever added into the game and essentially add like 1 point here, 1 point here, 1 point there. And then if those points were invalidated, if those points, for whatever reason, like you built too close to a structure, you built your objects or your base so dense that enough of those points were invalidated, that's where you would get those situations where they would move to build, or if there wasn't enough redundancy in the system that if they did fail, it would have dynamic fallback points. So one of the things that I did with this builder 2.0, I guess we can call it, is essentially make it to where it takes the red box and it essentially gets the build radius, because every structure in the game has a build radius, the minimum distance you have to get to it to call in the sky crane or to weld said structure. Is it essentially dynamically will move within that box and find a point and essentially do whatever it needs to do to call in said structure. And far as I know, I have not been able to break it until we have an actual build. I was able to break it, as I showed earlier in the documentation of the build reports channel that we have on Discord, is the first versions of them, the first like 2 or 3 days of versions were easy to break. But I have not been able to break this in extreme testing conditions where I build like a base so dense, more than I've seen on the Discord screenshots and the Steam screenshots. So it's one of those things where there's a couple of hyper optimizations I need to make to this system. I'll show you an example of that. And essentially at that point, we need to just sit on it and get to actually having a build. And then we need to stress test it. You guys need to stress test it. And then come back if we're missing something or something's not firing on all calibers. And essentially ignore these 2 structures over here. This is me just doing a dev test. I pre-place those with their static meshes. There's no gameplay aspects to them. And then you can see I can select the structures and everything's groovy, and I can see the health bars, and you can see if there's an ammo resupply radius that shows. It shows the name, sock structure, main tent, as civilian admin, motor pool, helipad. We started to get everything in there, all the icing, everything that kind of brings everything together and starts to make it Cepheus in terms of all the systems. Now, obviously, give me an example. These buildings don't have functionality at this moment. Literally up to midnight of last night, the last thing I did was make all of these buildings buildable, make them interact with the navigation mesh, i.e. characters won't try and run into them, and then essentially set the stage up to do the next pass going into this next week, which would be we need to get a shops menu online for the barracks, so it replaces these buttons with the actual shop stuff. We need to get the, that going, this going, that going. And the idea is that we'll prioritize on the structures that are going to be in the first playtest. So ideally, the motor pool, you won't be able to build anything off of it because the first pass, we're not doing vehicles, like I mentioned on the Steam post, and we're prioritizing on ground infantry, and we're building up from there over the next week or so. And then once that is solidified, and we're happy, and you guys are happy, and you play tested it, and we play tested it, and you guys can play in co-op, we can play in co-op on that test arena, then we're going to move on to vehicles. We'll do the ground vehicles, we'll do the airborne vehicles, and that's when you'll see the motor pool and the helipad regain its functionality of being able to build units and units come in and out. So just keep that in mind for that context there. I mean, the garrison tent doesn't work. There's no population in the game. So those are the example of things that we're going to start implementing as the formation system comes online. As I finish the builder, as I finish the wall builder, me and Derek are going to be kind of just jumping around doing the small little things that bring it all together and bring it home for actually having gameplay. So you can see here, let me show off the bound. Let me turn off the bounds. That's a little bit overwhelming. And I will show the rest of the structures, and then I will show where the system falls short. I was just testing that earlier for the podcast. So essentially, if I go over here and I go to defenses, some of these icons aren't updated. They came in last minute, and that was my fault. Basically, just they're a default to the barracks icon if there's no icon sourced. Here you can see the guard tower. You can see the restrictor. You can see the spotlight. The ammo crate one. I can a little bit closer. Let me see the speaker. Oh, that's a speaker tower. Oopsie. The medical tent, the generator, the ML tent, and the aerial denial system. And you'll notice a difference from how Cepheus does it is that you figure in the order that I built it, they have now added it to their queue, and they're going to work together to speed up building everything. So each person contributes a percent. That's more reminiscent of like Age of Empires, essentially. So there's no limit right now. So if you stack a bunch of engineers, you can build in-place structures quicker. Maybe we end up adding like a flood rate or a limiter in the future based off of playtesting. But the idea is each one of those guys are dynamically sourcing a location and moving together as a group because I told them to all build it as a group. So they're going to do that now. And the medium generators and the large generators, I was trying to get that in for this playtest. That was another reason why we started a little bit, no, not playtest, it's podcast. But I was not able to get the medium and the large generator in the show, sadly. But those are, I'll show them next Saturday. Is essentially we'll have like the small, that's the baby one, then you'll have a medium one, then you have a large one, and the medium one is double power and the large one is triple power. So like, it's like basically 300 to 400 power when you get to the course, rough give or take, when you get to like the large generator, and it's massive. It's like the size of like this command center over here. But it's really, really useful. I think it's gonna be really useful for those people that like to build like energy, like those little energy grids. They don't have to like do a crap ton of mini generators if they have the money to do the larger one. And then you can see like examples where like there are some structures I can't click on. Like this is an example where I need to send it back to the technical artist because the bounds of the collisions or the way that when we brought them over from the legacy project, or maybe something got corrupted, something got broken, it needs to basically be vetted and checked. But then there are other structures that are just fine, like the speaker tower and the active denial system just don't click. So like that's an example of like, the guard tower. So those are examples where I have to send it back to the technical artist, which is why you're going to see that Dimitri was not able to move on to Alcatraz this week because I had so much work for him to do. Me and Derek had so much work for him to do this week to basically redo the collision, recheck every structure, check their collision, check the sky crane, get us better move previews for these. So like we got the holograms in, we got the little disappearing like icon down there kind of deal. You can see this little velociraptor down there, but that's just our little internal meme of Jurassic Park. But essentially that represents the formation system. So we can click on it and debug it in the editor to see like what the formation system is thinking. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like we need to make sure this time around we're putting the attention to detail in to make sure that you guys aren't running into weird issues of clicking. And the one thing that still is wrestling my jimmies with this current system is how we handle the helipad, where it's one of those things where I think based off of just making it easier to work with, we might end up changing it to be a box design and shrinking it slightly, because you'll see in just a moment the issue. And I know this has been a complaint in a lot of Steam reviews, is that it's a box. So the idea is that we might have to make this a box and shrink it a little bit because it makes it to where you can't build here, you can't build there, you can't build there, and you can't build there. So it makes it harder to tightly knit together structures and entities. So it's one of those things where it's like, that's a point of contention that we're still just trying to like figure out. Can we get a spear? Is the spear going to fuck up the ability for units to walk on there? Because a spear you can't walk on. You can walk on a box, you can't walk on a spear. So it's one of those things where like I have to do some research. Me and Dimitri have to go back and forth because I know that's been a huge complaint. Is that the size of the helipad? I'm sorry, what? Yeah.
Is that a collision issue?
No, yes and no. Technically, it's because all objects in the engine by default use whatever like shape you use to bake the collision, like UCX collision, whether it be a box, a spear, or like I think there's another shape I can't think of right now.
I think we can use a cylinder.
Don't know. Because the problem is that you figure we have to do the research on that and do some. I literally just got the structure in at the 11th hour last night before I went to bed. So it's one of those things where I need to. This is going to be what keeps me up at night going into Monday and Tuesday, because this time around I want to do this structure in a way that informs the design for the battlements and informs the design for the eventually having the guard towers. We were supposed to have what am I thinking of? We were supposed to have basically pillboxes, or essentially like objects where they were elevated and you could put units on top of them, and they're sitting in the engine unused because we couldn't figure out how to make them work technically. Because you figure you had to be able to tell a unit to move manually on top of this object, and then essentially you could position them so they would shoot objects like below you. So like here, I'll just show you because you guys don't know what I'm talking about. So like if I go to like,
sure we can use the sphere because I've used them before and they seem to work.
we'll
I mean,
have
not
to-
sphere, cylinder. Sorry.
we will have to look into that. So I am talking about, where is it? This
So
one.
I can't help but think about the little raptor thing for the internal.
Oh yeah, it comes stock with the engine. I think
But-
someone really likes like dinosaurs in the Unreal Engine. And when
Sure.
it's been in the engine since Unreal Engine 3, and we just use it because it's funny. Because who doesn't love Jurassic Park? But this is
All I can think is Cirque control dinosaurs.
hell no. Anyway,
And the raptor.
no. So it's one of those
Right.
things where it's like this is something where it's been sitting in our SDK for I think the better part of like 2020, and it's one of those things where like we need to. What I was trying to use as an exercise to figure out the helipad is figuring out a system, whether it be a box or a circle or whatever we end up doing, so you can have navigation and slant and all the other stuff. So I'm going to be using that, and that will probably be potentially something that kind of inflates the amount of time that I put into the structure system, so that it's easier to do battlements, where we can have units that you can put on the walls, like in Age of Empires 4. I've been playing a shit ton of that game recently, or just being able to to kind of have that kind of that amount of like cohesion of like unit movement. So that's something that we're looking into. And then here I will show. Let me reset the map, and I will show one more thing before we move on to the other stuff. So if I go over here and I select these guys, so this is a weird little bug. Sometimes the cursor disappears, and we have to figure out why that happens. I gotta put that on my whiteboard going into Monday. But anyhow, if I go over here and I build a crap ton of the Sky Crane ones, you'll see an example of where the system kind of falls short, where it doesn't understand. There's no back button yet, so I have to get that in there with Derek. But you'll see where the system kind of falls short is that if enough people are assigned to the Sky Crane ones, sometimes the engineers don't properly add it to their queue, and essentially the ones that were building the Sky Crane bottom structures will stop, and then only one or two will resume building the guard towers. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, and in those cases, you have to go and hunt down your engineers and manually tell them to. And then the other remaining issue is you saw little Timmy right here, where he decided to go to that structure even though it was completed. So I have to add a callback system going into Monday, where the idea is that if someone already completed a structure within your queue, the first thing you do before you try and move to that object is you need to query, is it done? And then if you're on the way to an object and it gets completed, then you need to be relayed that information. So you clear it and you move on to the next thing in your queue. So those are two things where it's like, it's more of like a convenience of quality of life thing that needs to happen just to make it less micromanagey and less like it's easier to work with for the system. Because you figure like right now they didn't break. The fuck? Okay, they didn't break, but they broke earlier in an earlier test. Well, the idea was is 3 of them stopped at the Sky Crane structures, and then the one actually went around and built the in-place welded structures. So I'll have to technically it broke in a way where you have to like select those 3, but I'm gonna have to do some more QC testing and test for some edge cases where they can fail. Because like in my extreme example, and then we'll move on to Ephraim, is that like when I built a crap ton of barracks, my goal was to make it to where it was almost impossible, unless you like do an Age of Empires where you like trap your units into an area where like, because you can do that now with this new version. Yeah, where you trap your units into like a box where they can't escape anymore. Was making it to where like it's very, very robust. So you can see right there, that group just broke up into 4 individual people, and they assigned out that task sheet dynamically. So everyone got 2 or 3 barracks, and now they're just going to do it. So you don't have to go back and be like, oh, well, they're going to go one at a time, and then, that guy's going to have to wait for the structure to be done, because they don't contribute. All they're doing is picking up a radio and telling a sky crane to come. So the idea is that in this version, it's very dynamic to be like, okay, like let's break up the task, let's spread it up. And then when they can work together, they work together. So that way they can basically weld it quicker. Let me see. Yeah, so they're just still doing their thing. Yeah, because he just did his, and then, ooh, did I break it? Or is someone still gonna come over here? Oh, I might have broke it for once. Yeah, I think I broke it. Cool. So I have to figure out why that happened. So there's an example of where it broke on those two. So I'm going to have to do some edge cases and figure out why that occurred. And then hunt it down. You can see I was able to recover it by clicking on the engineer and just telling them to come over. But that's unacceptable. That can't happen at the end of the day. So if I have to basically, extend a little bit more resources towards them in terms of more expensive costs of checks or spacing them out to make sure that there's more redundancies and more fail safes in place, that's what I'm gonna have to do going into Monday to just maintain that the consistency of they always work no matter what. And the only time they don't is if you set them up for failure by boxing them in, kind of deal like in StarCraft or like in Age of Empires kind of stuff. So it is pretty damn good. It is close. But I think it's going to be a solid couple of days, because at least another 1 or 2 days until I'm happy with this, to where I can move on to the sandbag wall builder, which will probably round out another couple of days working from the framework of the system I've established for the welding aspect of it, where you can drag walls, you can have them snap. And then if anyone has any criticisms or suggestions on the current wall builder, something that they'd like to see implemented next time around, if there's something that you guys are seeing right now that you guys want me to implement or tweak or adjust, this is the perfect time to say that. Yeah?
The ability for us to curve the walls.
What do you mean by
Get
that?
a curve.
Like this? Where you hold R and T and it rotates the structure in place? Or what do you mean?
No. You know how you're talking about the walls?
Yes.
The wall builder.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ability to actually add a curve instead of just needing to put them line by line.
Is there a game that you'd recommend that I open and play to see a practical example of this?
Jurassic World 2.
Oh, Jurassic World Evolution?
Yeah.
The second one? Okay. So I'll put that, let me write that down on my whiteboard. Is to look into that before I'm allowed to start that, and then I'll come to a determination if we can fit that in there, because I have to look into that one. I've as you know, I barely played that game.
Yeah, you weren't a big fan of that one, and I'm very disappointed in you.
I want more of the dinosaurs and less of the management. I want to, you know what I mean? I'm just, I don't know. Jurassic World Evo, and then 2, and it was curving walls, you said?
Yeah, curving the walls.
Okay, I put that on my whiteboard. So you figure I'll look into that. And if anyone else has any suggestions or things that they want to add for the wall builder or for the in place or for the sky crane, you're welcome to please hold that for the AMA question area. So that way I can write those down. I don't miss them because I can't see the chat at all times when we're in these little podcasts. So when we're on that section is the best time to bring it to my attention. If me and Durivard miss something, bring it up again in the podcast. You're not being annoying. It's just I have like a billion screens at any given time, and so does Duravar, so we don't see everything all the time. Same thing for YouTube, same thing for Discord. So please, when we get to the AMA section, if you're bringing up things you want to adjust or change whatever, bring it up at the end, and we will talk about it.
2 people have got some good ones.
Excellent. So yeah,
props that align with the floor and curves for the sandbags and razor wire.
Put a pin in those. Can you write those down on a sticky note? And we'll come back to that at the AMA so we can have a discussion about that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So then that pretty much summarizes what I've been working on and getting my ass kicked on for the structures and the building placement. The last thing I can show is just the formation system moving through these structures for the people that are being like, oh, they're going to break. So essentially, you can see they're kind of fidgeting. Again, large move orders. I probably should give a smaller one. I'm setting them up for failure by giving them such a large one because Derek hasn't done enough edge testing to make sure that they work really well in those cases. Because right now you can see they're kind of like fidgeting and having a heart attack. But when they do work, they work. You can see they're kind of breaking up into subgroups. There's some failures there. that Derek needs to kind of iron out. They recovered. They went back around the structure and they stay together. That's not bad, but it can get better. Let's see if these guys are gonna. They recovered. These units recovered. Those units recovered. And you can see that they're an example of like, okay, like they're able to, recover in some cases, but there are some cases where they don't. Let's see if these guys are going to recover here. Yep, they recovered. So that is the newer formation system in action. And that guy failed. He has failed this test. He will be thrown off the island because that guy decided to basically just do whatever the hell he wanted, got himself killed. You failed the test.
He'll be
So
fed to Chelsea.
yeah, and then we're ultimately taking on that thing where if there's one guy that fails, redo the whole system. I mean, not redo the system, but audit it, clean it up, change it. You're not moving on to the next task until there's not a single case of a failure across the board in terms of their movement this time around. Where we're putting a lot more time into these systems where it's like, if we have to take a little bit longer, I think that people will be a little bit annoyed that things are taking a little bit longer, but they'll understand that it comes from a place of giving you guys the best possible product game experience. Where it's like, look, like we want to make sure that when this game is out on the co-op and it's done, going into the, Q1 and a Q1 and whatnot, you guys don't have to sit there and fight the game anymore. And you guys can just play the game and have fun. That's the goal at the end of the day, is no more bullshit. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm very keen on that. And I'll always be transparent about that, of like the issues that we're running into and why some things are taking longer and what we need to basically do to like maybe potentially pull some other people over from other divisions to crowdsource some ideas and do some research and development and look into what other games have done. Because we get to a point with a game of our caliber where you can't really find a correlation to other RTS games, because like you figure like we're kind of like in its own little niche of like, you can look at Total War, but you can't take their application of pathfinding one-to-one to how we do it, because they have nowhere near the object density in their worlds. You think of a siege battle, everything is nicely knit together, square rectangular buildings with not that much variance put in the middle of like the sidewalks and the avenues, and everything's wide open, and everything's always boxes or very basic rudimentary shapes that don't change, they're static. So it's one of those things where like we use them to kind of get like an inspiration or like a starting point, and then we're on our own. We're in the wild west to basically figure out like, okay, that's how they did it at their GDC talk. That's how they did it when they like posted online about like tackles and issues that you run into doing game design. But that's just the starting point. Now we have to figure out the rest on our own, and they just gave us the first maybe 10-20% of the way, kind of deal. So it's very, very just a matter of just testing it and just like, here, this is pretty damn good, but I don't like that micro movement, that damn stutter. So like that's something that Derek's going to be focusing on a lot, with just fixing the cases where they fail. Because like right there, that was perfect. Everyone folded. Oh, you failed. Those 3 are now dead. Like literally, if I had the delete key in, I would delete them right now. Oh, can't I? Yep, they're dead. You are off the island. I forgot. We put the delete key in, but we didn't bind it to anything. So you can kill them all, but you can't press the key. So I gotta write that down.
Insta-death.
Huh?
Insta-death.
Insta-death, insta-gibbed. So yeah, like that's just what we're working on from a programming standpoint. This will easily bleed over into a couple more work days going into the week. Now we're going to move on to the next section. So what do we have on the agenda now, Derivar?
So we now have Alcatraz.
Excellent. Efren, you're talking on this part. I don't want to hear myself talk anymore. Okay,
All right.
where do you want me to start? The dock?
So let's start at the dock and let's go up.
I mean, most of the time this week was spent mostly in Blender creating the modular sets to start, getting these buildings put together. Like, different kinds of doors, windows, window frames, stuff that I can plug into the building generator to, not just for Alcatraz, but also the rest of San Francisco, to start getting this stuff put together, take them from just being gray, faceless boxes into actual buildings with doors and windows and a little bit of detail to get started. So most of my time this week has been spent 3D modeling, creating collisions for these pieces, different styles of what I've just mentioned, like walls, doors, window panels, and all that stuff and all their collisions. And Still need to UV map them. I mean, they really don't have a lot of detail right now. It's just something to get these structures, going. As far as getting facades onto them, and most of it is done. I mean, I've got a good selection of parts to start messing with. I think it's like almost like 100 pieces of different variations of doors, windows, window frames,
I'll bring
and
up that
panels for the
picture.
buildings. And then now this week I can actually start getting started at plugging these into the PBG and getting these buildings looking more like buildings rather than just faceless gray boxes. Ran into a little bit of a problem with the blueprint though. Some of the pieces, I mean, there isn't. I mean, it's not fatal problem. I could pretty much work around it by just building those parts by hand. But the procedural building generating blueprint definitely helps speed up the process of creating the buildings, because you pretty much plug these into a spline. You stretch out the spline and it will create like the whole side of a building. The functionality is very limited, so I might even try to go look for a different procedural building generator blueprint to see if it works better than the current one we have, because the current we have, I picked it up back when I was blocking out San Francisco. It looked like a good blueprint, but it does have little, it's pretty complicated, but it does have some quirks to where like the pieces are scaled out of proportion and it makes it look like shit. So I'm going to try to fix that. See if I was getting gaps at one point between the wall panels and the roof panels and stuff like that. Managed to fix that. I believe it was a collision issue with one of the meshes that was kind of offsetting the pieces along the spline. But now it's kind of scaling it bigger than the ones that it's supposed to be flush with. So that was pretty annoying. But the workaround would just be placing those pieces in by hand. I mean, the hardest part really is just building the facades for these buildings. And it definitely speeds up the process. Let's see, what else am I missing? There are, of course, like sloped roofs. It has limited functionality in being able to like create custom rooftops. So there might be a point, and most definitely with most of these buildings on Alcatraz, where I'll have to build the roofs as a one-off, which isn't too much of a big deal either, because I have a bunch of roof pieces to work off of that I can just simply modify by moving some vertexes around or stretching them out and re-UV mapping, and bam, there you go. We have a custom-made roof that didn't take me like 2 hours to model. But the main point is the PBG blueprint definitely helps put these together a lot faster. I don't have to model them as one-offs in Blender. I can reuse the same walls, the same windows, just tweak the scaling or the shape, and pop in different window grids or frames and doors, and the possibilities are endless. So the base meshes are done, the collisions are done for that. I mean, the only thing left is UV mapping, but I'm going to leave that until after I've started putting these windows and doors into these buildings. That way, moving into the texturing process, everything's a lot easier. I mean, I did very minimal asset placement in the level this week because I wanted to get that out of the way this week. That way, by the end of next week, I've got buildings with windows, doors, and it's starting to look more and more like an actual location in a city. And with what I've done, we're also set to start doing this for San Francisco, because we're definitely going to need this blueprint to give that city a hell of a lot more variation as far as how the buildings look. I mean, you've been playing this game for a long time, you've seen that we've reused a lot of the buildings in many of our maps. And all these new pieces I've built, the blueprint for the procedural buildings is definitely going to help us, put together more varied building styles, with different architecture, textures, and because that's the way San Francisco is. It's just so much architecture, so many different styles. I mean even in Chinatown, you have this intricate building, which damn, even just doing the mod set for that is going to be some amount of work, but not too much because we've already got the base meshes set up. But it's like an Asian style building. You'll see stuff like that as well. And all the Victorian homes that you have in all the neighborhoods around the, downtown and whatnot. mixed in with all the modern buildings. So
I think
ton
the
of work
body
to
pit
do.
is still-
What was that?
The body pit is still there.
Oh yeah, we were talking about that
I
last
called
night.
it.
Where like
I
every time I
called
play a
it the body
podcast, I
pit.
have to like subconsciously know not to walk down this corridor because I
Wait,
always
is it
fall
still
to my
there?
death. Yeah, it's still there.
I fixed it last night.
Oh, you must not have committed because like literally every time I subconsciously like, oh, I want to go to never mind.
What?
Yeah, because then I have to basically stop and restart because there's no jump functionality or vaulting, like mantling yet. So it was one of
Fuck,
those things
maybe
where I
I
was like,
forgot to commit that one
let me just leave
piece.
that
Hold on.
alone.
Let's see.
But don't worry about it right now. Just get back to it whenever. But yeah, what else do you want to talk about?
It's committed.
Oh, I'll have to update again. I don't know.
Okay. Beyond that, I mean, got the building pieces set up. So it's time to start plugging that in. The destroyed buildings on Alcatraz. I'm thinking I might be able to do that as a modular set, but I'm gonna have to test that out, see how it looks. I mean, it's not a big deal doing it as a one-off either, because it's a destroyed building. There's not a whole lot of
They don't know what
detail
that
that's going to go
means.
into that. You know, the warden's house.
Oh, no, but they don't know what a modular set is to a one-off.
Oh, a modular set is basically like kind of like a
Legos.
set of pieces. Yeah, like Legos, a set of pieces that you can use to construct different kinds of buildings. Like you can use it to just build different shapes of buildings reusing the same pieces, and I can even modify those base pieces with different styles to make the buildings look different. Like I said, I have different window frames that I can then take and add, model different details onto them, save them out as, unique pieces, and then reuse those in buildings. And you can even mix and match sets to create different kinds of buildings, which will add more variation, especially in a large city like we have with San Francisco. Of course, most of the stuff that I'm doing for Alcatraz is going to be unique to Alcatraz, but I'm using the base pieces for Alcatraz to put together houses that are going to be featured in San Francisco and other buildings. So, I was able to kill two birds with one stone in this last week because San Francisco is going to be a ton of work as well. A lot
You
more
want to
than
explain what
Alcatraz.
PCG is to get some context?
Oh, PBG is procedural building generator. So it's like a blueprint that I picked up on the Unreal Marketplace. It's free for any of you who want to go and mess around with that. I'm pretty sure they have newer versions now because the one I have is an old one from like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years. So I'm pretty sure they've made improvements. I'm going to check it out. And if it is a lot better than the one we have, I'm going to switch it out and use that one. But, usually there's like a certain criteria that you have to build your models at, like certain dimensions, like 500 by 400. Like, the wall could be 500 units long and 400 units tall. And I mean, you could really just use any length as long as these pieces line up to each other when you're starting to plot out these splines. And yeah, now that they're all done, we can just plug those in and create different kinds of buildings that are more unique. They aren't too repetitive. And yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, it's definitely going to help in building San Francisco the most because that's where we have most of the buildings. I think Alcatraz has 12 unique structures.
Yeah, 12 main structures and a crap ton of miscellaneous.
So, I mean, I could probably bang out the base meshes for that in the next week, hopefully. Definitely. Because this thing definitely speeds up the process. I mean, I look back at when I was first starting out in the project and we were doing one-offs and fuck, that was a pain in the ass.
Well, there's still you still want to do that for what they call as the weenies or the hero objects.
Like
the statues or like the Golden Gate Bridge. But he's talking about more so give you guys more like a practical example. Let's say, for instance, you build a modular set or like a Victorian house, and you break it down into the elements of the walls and the windows and the doors. Then you feed that into a blueprint, like what he's saying about, and it will generate you 100, 50, 60 unique permutations, variations of that base structure. Think of it as like when you play Diablo and they randomize every encounter that you go into, the levels itself, is that the more you feed into this blueprint, the more variations it can output to you. Then you take that object that it dynamically generated for you and you bake it down into like a one-off asset that you can place, and it allows you to really quickly just like, diversify or just kind of populate a very diverse, large city with like a very modest tool set of maybe, I don't know, 10 doors, 10 walls, 10 ceilings, blah, blah, blah. And then you take that, you feed it in there, and it generates you 40, 60 variations. And you didn't have to do it by yourself. And if you don't like it, you keep regenerating, kind of
Yeah,
deal.
also set up like a material that will randomize the colors of the buildings as you're placing them. That way, you don't have to go in there and create a unique material for each building. It's the same atlas or the same material with pretty much, reuse the same atlas. I mean, we're probably going to have like a few different atlases depending on the styles of the buildings or the kind of like trim that we have on them or wall texture even. But that same texture can be used on 10 different buildings and you'll have like 10 different colors on it. So
that's right, yeah. Because you guys use
I've
that thing based off of location. Doesn't it change the location of the color of the building based off of its vector?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's how we do the
definitely
cranes. Without the crane, we use the cars and the some of the cargo containers. Dimitri set up some kind of material effect where it introduces randomness. Well, we don't on a per case basis specify the color of cars. It's randomly picked based off of their location in the world. So if we move a car 1 centimeter, its color changes, kind of deal. So that way we didn't want to like sit in there and like babysit every variation, and that introduces enough variety and enough like randomness into the world where you don't always see red cars because someone had a fetish for red cars that day, and then another area you see all blues. It's just completely random, and it just picks a random color off of the RGB table. And that was like a good little innovation that we did, that we figured out. Dimitri figured out in like the early onset of like 2020, and then we just kind of like slowly have surely worked that level of randomness into the building sets and the other stuff, so we get more variety in our environments, kind of deal. So we're always just kind of trying to push and endeavor to do things quickly and efficiently, but you guys are getting like the end consumer is getting like a lot of variation, a lot of like not copy and paste, because that's been a big thing for me. Is you saw it with Calypso, where there were a lot of the same structures from Treasure Island just copy and pasted into that map with a different variation. And that was a big push for Efren this time around.
Well, see, for us, it's going to be good for us too, because we can still go back and replace a lot of those repeated buildings with some of the new stuff. So this is where this comes in. It's like we're going to go back. I mean, I'm going to have to go back and replace some of those buildings so there's not so much repetitive, like in the neighborhoods or even in the cities. We don't have too many assets repeating again and again and again, and we have more variation, and you guys aren't looking at the same set of buildings that we have in other levels all the time when we start cranking out new maps.
Yeah.
Another thing I was trying to get straight is right now I just have it as one atlas, like one material, and I'm thinking like, damn, for the sake of like detail or just texel density, I might split it up into like 2 to 3 IDs per building, depending on how many textures we need to use. Like definitely I want to use a separate ID for rooftops, like tile textures on rooftops or some of the rooftops on buildings. A separate one for walls, and then another ID for trim. I know it's a lot, but I've realized right now, testing this throughout the week, that using one atlas, yeah, it's efficient, but it also kind of makes it a little cheap. And the textures don't look as good either, so I kind of want to maybe split it into 3 IDs if we can allow for that, but so far it's only one ID, and I don't think it looks good.
On the Treasure Island, or are we talking, with Alcatraz or globally?
Globally.
Theoretically, if we're using HLOD and world partition in the way that we're planning on, that shouldn't be a problem, because we're only going to be loading in maybe at most 10 grids over the entire world concurrently. So all of that's being pooled anyway and cached the moment you get away. So we can afford to have greater object density and greater fidelity in the assets. Then you consider nanite. So it's one of those things where I wouldn't make that determination now. We need to wait until we finish Alcatraz And then at that point, when you guys go back to San Francisco North, we make that determination based off of the numbers. Of we just need to try your idea and then do benchmarking and profiling and figure out what the implications on the video card are. Because I don't have a problem with that if it's not going to be a problem. You know what I mean? Where like we're not even really using resources right now with the video card.
That's why right now I just have it set up really simple with one material ID, one texture atlas, and just to kind of see where we go from there. But I wasn't too happy with the way the textures look, so that's why I threw it out there, because, yeah, it might be better to go split it into 3, depending on what we've got going on in the building, and to add more variation to textures. Because it will feed off the same base material. All we're really going to be doing is trading out texture maps for each instance.
Excellent. Okay, so is there anything else you wanted to cover for that section before we move on to the next area?
I think that's about it for now. I mean, this next coming week is just going to be getting these facades on the buildings and continuing the detail pass on Alcatraz before finally moving on to just finalizing the buildings and getting this stuff looking pretty.
Groovy. Anything for you, Durafine?
I was going to say, what are your sort of future plans to circify Alcatraz? It's like, what are the different elements and stuff that you're going to add later on in the ahead on the more northern section?
Oh, for now, we were focusing more on the sides where the players will actually be maneuvering through in the lobby, like the fairgrounds where that forward operating base is set up top at the cell house where the lighthouse is. Like the back lot, I'm going to be populating that too, which is back by the industrial buildings where you have the new industries and the model industries buildings, where you have this empty lot where currently on Alcatraz they're really just storing trash and building materials there, and it's mostly, I mean, the last time I went it was closed off to the public, so I couldn't really get in there and take pictures. Most of what I've been going off back there is pictures that are available online and what I can see on Google Earth. But it appears to be just mostly like a storage area for building materials and stuff like that. I mean, we could leave that open for the RTS version of the map for players to build, because there is plenty of room back there, and just concentrate a lot of Cirque's activity on where it's at right now, like the docks, the parade grounds, and the cell house. And I know Dimitri's been working on the cell house, so the interior for that's going to be added soon as well. I'll be handling most of the other exterior stuff around that area. So, and we are going to have like a stuff in the cell house. That's going to be pretty much Cirque's main operating area right there. All their equipment is going to be within the cell house. They're going to have a mess hall. They're going to have, sleeping quarters for the soldiers, command center in there, laboratory for the scientists, and then in the old, the yard in the back, the prisoner yard or the recreational yard, there's going to be a firing range set up for Cirque, more tents for equipment and soldiers. And as of right now, we don't have plans for the industrial area. I mean, right now, I'm probably just going to populate it with the trash and building materials that they currently have there in the real world. But I think it will serve as a good sized area for players to build in if we decide to keep all of Cirque's structures during gameplay up front. But not sure how we're going to handle that. I mean, we are doing 2 versions of Alcatraz, right? Like the RTS for building and
Correct.
the menu, right? Yeah. So right now it's like I'm focusing on just setting up for the player lobby, and then once we create another version for the RTS map, I'm not too clear how we're going to approach it as far as like, are we going to leave it empty for players to build, or are we actually going to have
be empty? Like the areas where you populated the Cirque stuff will always be empty, so they can just decorate it and build that island as a fallback point if they're getting their ass kicked on the mainland.
All right, good. Okay, that's what I was thinking. So
yeah.
I was a little worried there. I was like, damn, should I really be populating the fuck out of this?
No, because remember we talked about that previously, where it was like the idea was that like that was supposed to be like, like a staging area for like just showing off Cirque as a character, and then realistically the rest just comes down to like, okay, we need to take a version of it and like remove 80% of the items on there and make it to where it's just an empty slate an empty island that you can come in and ignore or you can build on. And then there's no real population there, so there's no civilians to worry about. It's just whatever you want to do there to make it like a mobile base. Oh, not mobile base, but I guess you can say it's like a quarantine base because it's not really easy for anyone to get to it.
And then you also mentioned that at one point we were going to build the basement, right?
Yeah, but that's
Inside
for the
the cell
campaign.
house?
We don't talk about it.
Okay.
We don't
Okay,
talk about
sorry.
Shh.
it. Classified.
Classified information.
Yeah. But yeah. Okay, what else do we got?
I think the one thing that I am curious about, if you're still going to add that little shooting range for the shooting of the boats.
Yeah,
it's
that's
been-
one of those things where because I kidnapped Dimitri. Me and Dare kidnapped Dimitri and took him off of his assignments for Alcatraz, and he's probably going to be kidnapped for at least another half a week to go through and vet the structures that you see on screen. Because like some of them you can't select, and some of them, like this right here, I can't select this structure. It's going through, checking their collision, figuring out how we're going to do the helipad, and doing some minor tweaks to get a block-out turret in. You know, like a prototype inspired turret in, even if it's not dunzos. So that way when we get to the point of implementing it during the programming, it at least functionally works and rotates and shoots, and then he'll have some time to iron it out and get it polished up in between, like, I guess you could say slow periods of time working on San Francisco North. But yeah, no, so it's one of those things where, like, ideally we'll actually have more of the jailhouse, the interior to show once we stop kidnapping him. Because he pretty much does all the VFX, he does all the buildings, he does all the animations for those. So there are times where we have to just kidnap him and like, you know, hide him in a closet so he can finish our stuff, and then he can go back to his original assignments. But what you saying?
I like that. I like the terminology of we're just kidnapping him. You know,
Oh,
we're
yeah,
just
we just yonk him.
we just yonk him.
Yeah, we just run away with him.
Just grab him by the collar of the shirt and run.
Pretty much.
So, yeah, but I think the more curious thing at the moment that I'm more wondering is what in the world are you doing?
I am actually having something visual for people to look at, and I'm writing down notes as I break it.
Well, fair enough. So moving on from that, my brain is confuzzled because I don't know why I'm trying to mentally count what you're trying to do.
Oh my god!
Anyway.
I'll stop. Oh my god!
I'm trying to. It's kind of like it's fucking with my head because like I'm trying to count how many you're doing and I don't know why.
I'm just doing the most eccentric basing nobody would ever do in real life to find edge cases where their pathfinding fails and they just sit there stupid and they're like, "What do I do?" And I'm trying to find like where I can improve my algorithm for searching and finding points, and then addressing the performance implications, because the more checks they have to do in a frame, the more costly they become, and the more of a frame rate hit occurs on the CPU. So I have to, whatever I do, I have to make sure that I'm spacing out those calls of like 0.1, 0.2, 0.4 milliseconds to make it to where like they don't, if they do fail, there's an acceptance of time of like, okay, you got your next try is in 0.1 seconds. You fail again, you do it again in 0.1 seconds. Because you could see when I first started building, my frame rate dipped because there were a lot of failed queries. And that's something that I need to like hyper optimize. Anyway, back to what you were saying, and I'll stop building so I don't confuse your OCD.
Yeah, it's just. Well, you said nobody will ever do that. Are you sure?
Nobody would ever do that. Like what I'm building right here are like developer stuff where it's like, why would you do this? I built like literally 30, I don't even count. I built like 20 supply crates that are just decorative items that have no gameplay purpose, just so I could just stress test the system.
I will strive to do this just to mess with your head and get you to wonder why.
Oh god, I'm gonna need alcohol when we do the first play test. You're gonna drive me to have a sake bottle ready to go, sake bottle ready to go when we do the co-op play test, right?
I actually added more variations of those crates too.
Yeah,
like
we have like a
single
couple
ones.
other crates that we never put into the game. Because fun fact, it was so complicated to add new structures in the legacy Cepheus protocol that just to add a new structure and add the UI icons and get it to where I just showed you everything here, that last night only took me 2 hours for every structure in the game, would have taken 2 to 3 days on a per structure basis in the old system. Or like just adding in a new like a decorative item like with terminal on her master thread that she made, that would take each item individually, would have taken, only Dare could have done it. And it would have taken basically a day or two just for like a new item 2 to 3 hours easy on just one part, 2 to 3 hours on another part. Now the new system takes 5 to 10 minutes. At worst case, depending on like with a decorative item, we can add those, and probably the most time-consuming process of making a decorative item is making the item now. So actually putting a new item into the game is probably less than 5 minutes for doing decorative items. The only time that it gets more complicated is like a motor pool or a barracks, because then you have like resupply and you have like building shop menus. So that's what takes longer now. And figuring out like, oh, if we add a new structure and it's like a medical structure and it can build medics, well, theoretically, where it used to take maybe 2 or 3 hours to set that up and just defuck the spider web that we had going on, it take like 5 to 10 minutes, ideally, extra minutes. Like if you make a new medic structure and then you make it to where that can build a medic, another 5 minutes is just linking some data assets, using some dev names, some unique identifiers to make the system known that it needs to seek out to build a certain object, and then it just works. So it's one of those things where it was like, that was a huge design goal this time around, to make sure that like I could do it, a non-programmer could go into our SDK and make a structure, shift stuff around. Because like in the old legacy system, give you guys an example. See, these debug objects are nuking my frame rate. Those objects are so expensive to render, and it's like you saw my frame rate dip for a second there. But in the legacy Cepheus, let's say for instance, like I wanted to move this sock over here. You'd probably be doing that for maybe 10 minutes. With the new system, 5 to 10 seconds. Or literally, it's just a matter of just rearranging a T array in a data asset instead of having to go into an event graph and move and copy and paste nodes. And oh God, it was nightmare fuel. It was like literally like horrible. So it was one of those things where it was just kind of like, this time around, the system is a lot more robust in terms of allowing like more content to be added with less actual bullshit of like, okay, like I can, like Dimitri goes and makes a new radio tower structure. I can have it in the engine with health, selection, bar, health, everything in less than 10 minutes tops, and have functionality. Assign it to a faction so that the infected know they can destroy it. Assign a priority to it so that the infected would know it's a non-combatant. I don't care if it's not in my way. Like that kind of functionality was the reason why we decided to delete everything and start over. Because it came down to just learning it the hard way of what we thought was the correct way of doing it was incorrect. And there were a lot of ways of doing it better. And I'll do you a better one. In the beginning, when we did the vehicles, the Sky Crane was one of the first things that we ever put into the game. Funny, hilarious story here is that when we brought the Sky Crane in, it was brought in. You would think this would be trivial, but it really matters in game design and math. Is that it was brought in with the Sky Crane facing the wrong direction, y-axis forward, instead of x-axis forward. Now, what that means in the relation of like game design is that when you import an object into a game engine, in your 3D modeling program like Blender Max, the direction that the object faces in matters in the 3D software, because when you bring it in, that dictates the direction it's going to face in. Like you'll notice that when I rotate the guard tower in previous sessions of this podcast, it doesn't face the right direction because the guard tower was brought in incorrectly, where basically it should have been facing X forward, but it's facing like Y forward. So that means that's why when you rotate the guard tower, it doesn't face the right orientation. And what artists might have done in Legacy is they would have applied small little minor rotators that happen on the millisecond of frames to make it to where like it course corrects the asset that should have been done from the fundamental get-go correctly. So I'll show you an example of like the guard tower where you can see like it's facing the wrong direction. You can see that object was imported with the wrong orientation from a modeling standpoint, and that asset has to be re-imported into the entire SDK facing the proper direction, so that way the front of the guard tower is always facing where the mouse is. And the same thing happened to the Sky Crane, where it was one of the first things we ever brought in, and we weren't aware of it, and then before it was fixed, the programmer just applied a Band-Aid fix instead of sending it back to the technical artist. So it was one of those things where it was like a workflow issue, and then that got baked in. And then it got worse and worse because then when you have other structures come in, you would have to apply minor adjustments to course correct and fix it. But in the case of replication, all of that data has to be sent over the internet. So now you're wasting calls, you're wasting bandwidth on something that should have been done from a fundamental onset of importing and authoring the asset. So it's one of those things where like you would think that the rotation of an object doesn't matter, but that's also why like before we joined the podcast, this would come in incorrectly. Where like when you would build it, it would be in the wrong orientation because the sky crane was rotated incorrectly. And it would be a trickle down effect where it would be like, oh, hey, like the motor pool is going to teleport backwards. And it was fixed. I didn't know about this until now. It was fixed basically by putting like a little like, after it got deployed, it would teleport, but you couldn't tell it. You couldn't see it. It happened in a millisecond of a frame. So a human eye couldn't perceive it unless you recorded it. And maybe even then, depending on how fast your processor is, you probably wouldn't even see it then. So like you can see in this example, it's going to like do the thing, like it does it correctly. But like before we started the podcast, it would teleport backwards. Or some of the buildings would have weird orientations. So like that was one of the things that like we've been kind of finessing and cleaning up and reauthoring our buildings and streamlining and basically like unifying the process and the order of operations of how things work. And at the same time, everything has to work the same way. You can't have this structure operate this way and deploy in this unique way, and then the other 90% of objects deploy in a completely different way, but they're all brought in via the sky crane. So that was a big thing of like breaking things down and making it into like a digestible, easy to understand format. Where like if I go to say like this structure and I open up its blueprint, a blueprint is basically like an instruction set in the Unreal Engine. Every game uses it that you play in the Unreal Engine. And essentially, if I go to like show modified, you'll see that like there's a deployed skeletal mesh, a deployed static mesh, and then there's the data asset, and then there's the engineer animations that we played for repairing and building. And you'll notice that there's a static mesh and a skeletal mesh and a deploy animation. So one thing that we learned early off, which was killing your guys' performance, was this is a thing that we baked in fundamentally instead of doing it on a per case basis, is having it to where essentially when you build a structure, it comes in as a more expensive skeletal mesh so it can animate. And then when it lands, it deletes the skeletal mesh version and it transitions after it deploys to a deployed static mesh version. Now that makes it to where you're not having to tick the animations and keep the pose. Think of it as like when you go to like those really bigger cities and you see those mannequins where they're like you have to like throw money into the bin and they won't move or whatever. The same concept applies for like a game engine where for a character to hold his form, for him to like animate, even if they're in an idle, that costs CPU. So in cases where you can, you bake down their pose if they're not moving anymore into a static mesh base. That's like a I guess you could say like a static version. Static. It's basically like a baked down simplified pose that we convert the skeletal mesh to in runtime, and that saves you a crap ton of performance because now your CPU doesn't have to figure out, oh, I got to keep playing this idle animation forever, or I got to tick this animation blueprint forever, even though there's no animation occurring. So we use vertex animations or like little tricks to basically like when you look at the fans on like the vehicles, those aren't like animated traditionally. They're animated via some like vertex like cheap animation method where we're faking the animation data, which is why like when you zoom in on legacy Cepheus, you'll see like the fans spinning on some of like the structures. It's not a skeletal mesh anymore. It's a static mesh, and we're using a visual like a visual I guess you could say like a trick to basically emulate that we're animating it conventionally in like a modeling program. So that was another thing that you'll notice where it's like that was a big push of like baking it down into like, and then if you don't have a skeletal mesh, like an example of like a MO tent, those skip the skeletal mesh step and go straight to the static mesh the static mesh version, and it's more performant. So then that way, you guys don't have to worry about trying to initialize an object that's not even going to be used in gameplay. So like those like the behind the scene things that you think that like, oh, you just put a thing in the game and it just works. But there are like so many hops that you have to go over to not, because it's one thing to have a game and it works. And it's another thing to have a game that's performant and it actually like fires on all cylinders. Like you can do things and they just work, but as you can see, you have technical depth that you accumulate over time that cripples your project or makes it to where your game is a poorly optimized mess in terms of like it's just hard to basically optimize and work with. And you'll see examples of that in the industry of different games where it's like, why does that game run so poorly, but this game runs so great, but that game looks better? And it comes down to just basically from a fundamental standpoint, how do you plan and execute your pipeline and keep within the constraints of the box that you established for like optimization and everything else. So again, that's been just another thing where it's like, just kind of optimizing and getting all this situated, because all of these are merged over in the static meshes. And if I press F11 and then F8 and then click on it, you'll see there's just a static mesh here, and the skeletal mesh is gone. And then there's just the nav modifier that basically automatically, dynamically updates the navigation mesh, and then adds an extent, a safety margin around it so units don't get stuck on the object's collision. Because that was another feedback point you guys were very keen on, is that units would sometimes clip into an object and then you're done. You're stuck. Fuck you. Like that unit never recovers and you're just out of the game. You get to delete them. So that was something else that we did differently with the structures this time around, is make it to where it should be near damn impossible to get a unit inside of an area when it's coming down. And it should be damn near impossible for a unit to get stuck and clipped onto a building, because the collision and the nav mesh are desynchronization to where they're not on the same page. And that makes the AI think, oh, I can move through here. No, you can't. The collision's slightly bigger, but it's not affecting the navigation, kind of deal. So it was one of those things where I was like, that was really big for me to just kind of process and put the time and effort in this week to make sure that the structure system was good. Because then this carries over to the walls. And this is a system that we're stuck with forever, and you guys are stuck with forever, in terms of like, it needs to be, this is a fundamental aspect of an RTS game and very important for when you're considering the ramifications of having issues with the building system for when it comes to the infected, and then being able to slip through holes, because I know that was a big point that I'm going to have to spend a lot of time in, is making sure that the wall builder is super, super accurate to, like, say, building in small confined spaces to where you don't have to come up with those little gaps where somebody could slip in and you didn't even realize that was a problem until it happens. Because I know I got a lot of people that were talking about that on reviews, on just DMing me and everything. So that would be another pressure point that I'm going to hit upon going into this next week. So I went off on one of my spiels. Duravar, let's move on.
Okay, well, I guess I got a phone call, sadly, so I wasn't.
I stalled them. That worked out involuntarily.
Yes, that's worked out quite wonderfully.
Okay.
So honestly, I don't have anything left on my list.
Okay, so go on to questions.
I think we've covered absolutely everything. Yeah, so let's move on to questions. So let's find the two questions that we.
And if you guys have additional questions based off what we've talked about for the structures for Alcatraz, feel free to throw them into the chat right now so we can have a discussion and go back and forth. Because again, my goal going into this week is I need to finish completely bugless what you guys just saw for the structure building, and then I need to start the wall builder. And then once the wall builder is done, then I need to get the operator building and add some functionality to the structures that need it until Derek is ready to come in and do the shop menu so we can get the barrack stuff operational. So let's see. We got a question here.
So, I was just going to cover the two questions that we got at the start, and then because they've probably been waiting patiently.
Oh yeah.
So Iglis had asked about covering about the curve in the walls and also props aligning with the floor.
Props aligning with the floor. So he's talking about basically having like a surface normal where, like, I guess you can say an example would be is like if you were building on like a landscape where there's some curvature, it's more. Don't they already do that for the sandbags, or am I confusing the term? Where like the sandbags normalize to the ground and they try and basically curve to it to the best of their ability? Or am I misunderstanding the question?
I think they're about to respond.
Because again, it's one of those things right now where essentially for the curvature, I'm going to look into that. I've already gotten enough people mentioning it today that I'm going to have to look into that and figure out and play some games that do it, and then come up with a proof of concept in terms of basically establishing it.
So while
yeah,
oh, here you go.
Oh, because like the biggest thing is that I know I did some research on that. I got to play Jurassic World Evolution 2, what it seems like. I need to go play some City Skylines and some other games before I wrap up the structure system and see if there's anything else that I'm missing. Because again, I need to do the wall builder and normal structure system, and then I'm going to replicate everything and test it in co-op and all the other fun stuff. So, because keep in mind, everything I just showed is not replicated yet until I'm happy and it's final, and then I have to go back and figure out the replication for all of it, which will probably take another day or so just to get it working for co-op. Is it possible for the walls to have a toggle? Oh, we have that already, but yeah, you're right. That needs to be brought back in with this newer version. Where when I do the walls, because right now the walls, I don't think it's spacebar, but when you're building a wall, you can press spacebar and it changes the dominant direction that you're faced in. So then that way you can angle it correctly. There's really no gameplay ramifications for it besides just looking nicer. But it is one of those things where it's like I have a problem with that. Like that's something like the first thing I'm gonna do is open up Legacy Cepheus, play it for like 5 to 10 minutes, write down my observations to do a refresher on the wall builder, and then look at what would come up here, compare and contrast, and then execute. Or it's like, and just kind of go from there. Let me see. What other questions do we have?
Well, maybe my phone's ringing again.
Okay. Oh yeah, because I remember that one terminal. Is that you and a couple other people were pretty vocal about having it to where you could rotate the objects via, I think it's spacebar off the top of my head, so that way you could have it face the orientation that you wanted to, so it would look more aesthetically pleasing. I'm trying to think. What other questions do you guys have in terms of anything else for the structures, the buildings, anything that you saw today for the formation system? Let me take YouTube. I keep seeing curve consistently. Like you guys are mentioning that quite a bit. So the grid for building, I did put in a preliminary snap system. It's not binding to a key yet. That's something else that I need to do for icing on the cake is add in that little widget on the top right. So when you're in builder mode, it shows the hotkeys. Because it's one of those things where like there is a wall builder snap tool and it snaps to every 100 centimeters. I might have to increase that to every 300 to 500 centimeters. But the idea is that like, I don't think we'll ever truly be able to do like a grid snap where it breaks the world up into grids because of the unique shapes of our structures, but they're not all box based. So that's kind of out. And because I noticed when I was playing a lot of games that had grid based snapping, like Age of Empires and Company of Heroes, they all were like, you couldn't rotate the structures, a lot of other things. Once you start to do that, it introduces a lot of opportunity for failure. So it was one of those things where it was like my compromise for doing a grid snap was just having a key where it literally just puts it into like an invisible grid snap per se, where you don't see a grid, but as you move your mouse, it'll move it in set increments of like every 200 or 400 or 500 UU based off of like when we have our first playtest, I need to find a normalized number that makes sense, that's not too high and not too low based off of what people want. In worst case, I can just go back and look at the old value. I think it was around like 200 UU that it would snap between, which is approximately about 200 centimeters. Let me see if there's any other questions. So yeah, Addy had that question for grid snap. Oh, you gonna say Durvar?
Just on the subject of the playtest. Can I shoot you in the playtest?
I hate you. I'm gonna make sure I turn off friendly fire just for when I play with you.
No. You must have friendly fire on. We must have friendly fire on. Otherwise, it's not fair. I still remember yesterday.
Oh yeah, you shot me in Helldivers, you dick.
I shot you just because of the sake of
me and Chris and Durvar were all playing Helldivers, and we were playing with Hellhound, I think too. Yeah, Hellbound. And for whatever reason, I was looking at Durvar, and he was sitting on a hill, and he was aiming his gun towards me, and I was like, "Oh, there must be a Tyranid or whatever behind me." No, he shot me, And then like literally I asked him about it. He was like, "Oh no, I shot you on purpose." And I was like, "Oh, fuck you."
And then I died to a charge.
Yeah, I
So
was
karma
glad you got
came in and hit me in
charged. You
the
got
face.
cleaned by a charger the moment I was about to shoot you and I spawned in. That feels.
Karma was served very quickly.
Oh yeah, no, I felt better about that situation. But let me
course you would.
see. Oh yeah. Oh, Buffalo asked a question on YouTube. His question is: while designing the pathfinding, is there any plans for tack formations? For example, you have the riot shield, but have a small team stack up behind a guy with one, so you maneuver a group together. So you're basically saying like basically a rating system for the formation to where it tries to prioritize people with like melee weapons or riot shields in the front. But the idea is that you'd have maybe like your melee guys in the very, very front, and then you'd have your riot shields behind them, and then you'd have like your actual projectile, like range-based units behind them. Something along those lines, right? So when you make a selection, you don't have to babysit them. Am I understanding correctly? Well, I'm assuming that's what he asked, and that's something I've talked to Derek about. And when we get to the first infantry playtest, we're going to have the riot shields and all the other stuff in there. So we're going to make an extreme effort to get all of that baked in there this time around. Because the riot shields were a good idea, but it requires too much babysitting in Legacy. So that was another thing where it's like, we will potentially have to go back to the formation system in a week or two just to make sure that's working correctly before we do our first playtest, because we've talked about that at exhaust in terms of making sure that this system is extendable to the vehicles, the helicopters, and weapon classes, where they're assigned a position based off of their weapon. So, like, if you have a riot shield, a heavy riot shield, or a light riot shield, you're always going to be in the tippy front. But if there's a melee unit, they'll always be in the front. You know, so like in front of the riot shields, because they're the real cannon fodder above like the riot shield guys. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we've talked about that, and that's something that we're baking in fundamentally, and we're going to test. And that's another reason why I didn't want to just rush straight to the vehicles and then leave stuff like that on the wayside, because I want to leave enough time between each phase to get feedback, to talk to you guys about it, to play test it, have you guys play test it, and then move on to the vehicles and the doctrine stuff and everything else, the fun stuff. Because the vehicles are going to be what kicks our asses ultimately. I would wager that the vehicles will be harder and more complicated to do than the pandemic system on its own, because there's so much nuance to their pathfinding and whatnot. So that's going to be fun, but it is what it is. So that's another reason why we're just kind of earmarking the vehicles to be at the end of Doctrines, so we can get as much content and have you guys be able to start play testing and start playing a game, even if it's in that co-op test arena, while we're going to be engineering and working on the vehicles and getting them off the ground. Okay, so what else do we have for questions, Dervar?
Imperial Japan asked if we can have some more props, and
there's a master thread that Terminal has and she maintains for that. If you have,
I saw one that I really want added.
What?
A body pit.
I should have known that. But it's one of those things where put it on the thread. And for right now, I mentioned this. I think someone asked this question. I don't think Terminal was here last week, but they asked this question. I think it was last week, where it was like, when are we going to add more decorations? And my answer stays the same. Is I'm not adding any more now the system to add decorations takes 5 minutes per decorations, but I'm not going to add decorations until we can sit down and audit the AI before or during the next playtest, so I can fix their threat system so they don't get confused and they understand what the bare minimum they need to destroy, tackle, do to reach their target. So that way you can't exploit building 1,000 decorations and it breaks the AI because they don't know how to get to you anymore, because you've now made a massive divide of navigation updates. So it's one of those things where it's like, once that comes in the next couple of weeks, because like right now, here, let me bring up my Word document. Right now, we have about probably a dozen items in my mind that need to be done before we can have our first play test. And there's a couple of sub items, but they're minor and they probably take like 10 to 20, 30 minutes here and there. And once those dozen items are done, then it's going to be doing the first play test that I showed you in that arena. And then we're going to look at the AI, look at everything we have, and figure out a way of having it so we can get the Steam Master Server online, or maybe just have it to where you guys can join via console commands and get that to you guys. And then the next step will be, before we like move on to the other stuff, we need to take a real look at the AI and figure out what we need to bake into their system that supports co-op and replication, so they understand with the current items, because there's enough decoration items that you can litter an arena with stop signs and poles and a bunch of other stuff to the point where they will go around them and you can corral them like a tower defense. So I want to accomplish that and get that fixed. And I have a lot of ideas on how to accomplish that, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So when we get to that point, I will go buck wild and I will put those decorations in there and make sure they have some kind of purpose in gameplay, where like I think Terminal had like a radio tower. Realistically, that would make sense for like extending the radio operator. You just make it expensive, so anyone from that range can basically call in airstrikes, and you can build that like plate that the radio tower, and that would essentially be like a stationary emplacement where you can call airstrikes around, kind of deal. So it's one of those things where it's like, intentionality in design is I don't just want to throw a bunch of decorations in there and there's no purpose, because even the decorations that are just like the supply crates, they still serve a purpose. They still block the navigation and allow you to corral or make a makeshift barricade between you and the enemy, or they absorb bullets. So it's one of those things where it's like, I want to make sure the AI is ready to level up with that change. The same way we're like, when we get to this playtest, me and Derek are going to sit down and crowdsource and figure out this climbing mechanic. Well, we got the jumping down. You saw that earlier in the podcast. Now we need to get that functionality in where we get a grapple gun for the Cirque, and the infected just scurry their ways up the wall, and basically they can move up the wall at a slow rate, and all we do is interpolate them up the wall and loop a climbing animation. And when they get up the wall, they can kick your ass. And at that point, we can remove the build restrictions on walls. Because then that removes a lot of setup time that the level designers had to do in terms of like putting on all these like no build volumes and all these like manual systems to stop players from like building and exploiting areas of the map. Now there's no safe harbor. So they're going to find you wherever you go. And that's one of the biggest things before we scale up, is accomplishing that in that co-op test map. Having Dimitri put potentially probably another about 1 to 2 dozen more structures in that map, and then having some ramps and some other stuff implemented so we could stress test and get everything working in that map, and we can show you guys. Okay, so I handled that decoration thing again. Let's see. I gotta put that on the website FAQ. I'll put that on the website FAQ. Okay. You're going to say, Durvar? What other questions do we want to pick off now?
Joker asks a really good one.
Ooh. He loves bringing the 1-2 punches.
Can we get special formations for the shield formations like Roman turtle formation or phalanx, like a shield wall moving and the guys behind it?
Oh, so you're talking about like the Spartan thing where they like form like an actual like moving wall, and there's no way of applying damage unless you just don't have enough guys in the formation.
Yeah. That's a good one. I like that idea.
Yes. All right, hold on. I have to think about that. Huh. Let me put a pin in that one. I don't have an answer for that this time, but it's not a bad idea. There's a lot of things that would facilitate us. That would require us to put a little bit more time in the formation system to make it support that level of robustness. Because I was thinking more of like the formations like the line, but the formation like the line where like the forward part of the formation is always going to be the shield guy. So they'll melee and they'll protect you. So just by orienting the formation correctly, you by default get that functionality that you're talking about. But you're talking about a level above that, where it's like Total War. I do it all the time. When you're moving up from Arrow, like we're in Lord of the Rings, when they're sieging Helm's Deep, where essentially they make like that little full-on like porcupine thing, and it basically nullifies projectiles. But it's one of those things where like I don't know on that. I don't have an answer at this time. That might be something that we could potentially look into in the future, because that's going to take quite a bit of R&D and potentially probably another pass to the entire formation system to support that level of precision of movement. Because my concern is the density of the objects. Like where you look on my screen right now, that formation would buckle and break constantly as they shift positions. So it would require a fundamental rethinking of how we handle movement to make sure that they're not opening themselves up to massive attacks. Like a human being would understand in a formation how to move through that thing in like a porcupine formation, but an AI won't inherently. So it would require a lot more pre-processing of the environment and being more predictive of what's coming up to make sure you're not putting them into a situation to die. So let me think about that. I don't have an answer yet, but it is a good idea. Next question.
Let me just run back. I was just going to get a drink. Sorry.
Sure.
Seeing as we're talking about formations, will vehicles be included too at one point, like ammo carrier or a Bradley?
Yes. So we talked about this briefly before, and I'm going to hit upon it again now, is that one of the things that we want to do this time around is make sure that we made a mistake with the previous formations, and we kept making this mistakes over the course of years by, I feel like, going over how we handled vehicles incorrectly. Vehicles were never going to work in the confines of having a traditional diamond or like a wedge with the object density that we have in our game. They needed to understand that they were preset positions in the formation for a vehicle. Say you're moving in a column or like a circle, the vehicle can't do anything with infantry. So it's one of those things where like they needed to understand they need to move behind the formation in a break. So the idea would be is that you would have like multiple columns, and then you would have like, depending on like, let's say you have 3 JLTVs. I'll draw this out. Actually, no, I'll just do it in the engine. So like, I'll just show you a visual indicator. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to go and grab an assault. And this is my thought process on it. And if you guys have a counter argument, let's talk about it. But if I can spell assault correctly. So let's say I go to my skeletal mesh for little Timmy here. I'll just grab anyone, I don't care. And now I'm going to grab, let's grab the Ajax. Oh, it's probably called the Hummer in the engine. It's not called the Hummer in the engine. Okay, I'll just grab the JLTV because that probably hasn't been brought over yet. So let's say, for instance, we have a formation where essentially they're moving in a column. And I'm going to do that right there. And I'm going to move him back a little bit. And I'm going to grab him. And I'm going to say it's a 3x3 column. And they're going up like that. So my idea was to make it to where you get enough of both worlds, is that each vehicle would have defense points attached to them. And the idea is that's the physical protection that moves with the vehicle. Then when those points are taken up, they would fall back on columns and columns and columns in front. So the larger the formation becomes, they would basically just pile. I can see the gizmo. Sorry, this monitor has really, really bad contrast. I need to get a better monitor for doing the displays. But that would be one formation moving together down a street. And the idea is that like these guys are in column, but these guys aren't even going to attempt to do column. They're going to fall back into a defensive posture behind the infantry and basically move in behind them. And let's say you added Bradley, well, then the Bradley would have more points. You added Abrams, they have more points. The points are dynamically determined based off of the bounds or the perceived length and width of the vehicle. So then that way we can have it to where like, okay, like you have your spot, you're going to move with your formation in that spot. And when you have like a group of infantry, like these guys, hold on. They would just keep on building it. So if you have excess infantry, they just do that. And they keep on going down. And that would be an example of like, by default, when you have a formation of infantry and vehicles, they're always going to default to this. They're not going to like try a circle, try a wedge and all this stuff. And then it's going to fail Because the problem is that our world is so packed together with assets that it's never going to work. And then we're going to put the vehicles in a position to die. We're going to put the infantry in a position to die. So it's one of those things where it's like, those are the things that we want to kind of do to essentially, and then you have helicopters. Well, then they would do this. So let's take a sparrow. Oh, we call it a little bird in the engine. Shh. So let's say we take a sparrow. Ah, there you are. And we put little Timmy in there. Then in that formation, they would understand that there are preset points that they move within that formation. So they would fall in and essentially move like that. And that's the concept. That's the idea that we're going with this time around, to make it to where it's like you don't have to babysit them and it's a combined assault. And we're not overcomplicating it. Because the problem is we set ourselves up for failure trying to basically do all of these like crazy like situations that's not going to work based off of the confines of our game. Like if we were a simpler, empty world where there wasn't much in terms of like dynamism of like entities updating and changing constantly, then we could have like, if it's an empty battlefield like in Total War, then you can do formations for the vehicles. You can do formations for the helicopters. You can do formations for the infantry when they're combined. But the moment you start to like have an urban jungle, you're kind of fucked. And it's one of those that we've had to learn that the hard way by like, we can't make this work. Like it's incredibly hard to do. And all it does is trying to maintain that thought process, that exercise is put people in a position where they're going to lose in the game. So I feel like this is the most healthy compromise when it comes to a joint unit effort. And then when you get into like, okay, let's say I take these helicopters and I move them off and now they're their own little formation. They could have their own formations. Unique to the characteristics of how helicopters actually do formations. So they're not going to be the same ones as the infantry. When we get to doing the helicopters and when we get to doing the vehicles, we'll ask, say, Michael and Dimitri and Chris, because Dimitri and Chris have real military experience. And then Chris is the game designer and writer. And then we'll look online and we'll pick 3 formations for when vehicles are by themselves that make sense for an urban environment where it's not going to be this long-winded movement that's going to just be impossible. Like a wedge, I don't think that's going to be possible for vehicles. I think that when it comes to vehicles, well, mostly, I shouldn't have done that. When we do the vehicles, I think that based off of the complexity of the environment that we're dealing with in Cepheus, I think that the compromise is going to be something like this, where it's a 2x2, and then it's going to be like this, where it's single file, and then that might be it. I don't know. We have to get together. We have to like discuss amongst ourselves when we get the vehicles in and discuss the limitations and the best ways of giving people the gameplay they're looking for. And it kind of is like, hits all the right bars. Because you figure for helicopters, you can obviously do even more complicated ones. Like for helicopters, you can do a wedge, so you can have it to where like, this is going to be so bad. Hold on. I'm so bad at this. Oh no, the top down didn't work because the side dome is fucking me. Okay, so hold on. You can do stuff like this, and then like that. Hold on, it's like Black Hawk Down where they have like the little. You do like a staggered where it's like there's a disposition of like space between each helicopter. It's like that kind of, and then you just duplicate it. Obviously, don't take this literally. It's something like that, or it's retarded. Okay, that's a retarded formation, but you get the concept. The idea is that, like, essentially, you can do more varied, larger ones for helicopters. That you can do like the 2x2 and the 1x1 over there, but then you can also do like a staggered where they spread out because they have rockets, they have missiles, they have more. You know what I mean? Like helicopters have more room to traverse. So that's where you get into the area that I'm talking about, like Total War, where helicopters are like, they have a lot more opportunities available to them in terms of movement and traversal because there's less tolerance or concept of failure for them. kind of deal. So that's the idea that I'm kind of going with, where it's like you kind of have like this mixed net of movement, and that's the vector we're moving towards, where it's like right now we're just trying to prioritize and get the infantry and the ground infantry solidified, and then lay the groundwork for the helicopters and for the ground vehicles. And then we get to them and we implement what I just showed you. And we do the ground vehicles and we do the helicopters. And then we make it to where they all work together. And then like when you're doing helicopters, they just default to this formation. But you have your individuals for like when they're by themselves. So does that make sense? I don't know if anyone wants to bring up anything else. Any feedback or criticisms on that?
Someone asks maybe you can have dynamic relative position, but you control them with custom formations would fit better, like in Sea Power. Now,
Sea-Power? Oh, that's the game you were showing me.
yeah, Sea Power. Yeah, Sea Power is a bit different to this.
Oh, the problem with Sea Power is that you're on water,
and you don't have any.
There's no obstacles besides the ships, and you're dead by the time you get to a ship. So, like, while what you're saying makes absolute sense of doing some amount of dynamism or dynamic path generation, my concern is when it fails, and that with what I'm pushing for now, after years of kind of developing it and figuring out like the edge cases, I feel like this is the most healthy compromise. But I could be wrong. You know what I mean? Like we might have to just do some alliteration or some tweaking here and there based off of playtesting, because we have learned a lot. This formation system against legacy formation system they're not even comparable in terms of basically how we went about writing them, how they're replicated, how they're maintained. It's easier to work with in every possible aspect of them. So it's one of those things where it's like, this is our battle plan that I'm showing you in terms of implementation. And then like, if we find out a better way of doing it, you best believe we'll do it. But for right now, my understanding is this is the best compromise. Let me see what you guys are writing in the channel. Let me catch up on what you guys are saying. Hold on.
Yeah. So Ice Money's got a question.
Ice Money?
Yeah.
Did he raise his hand?
No, didn't raise their
Don't
hand.
ever talk to us on voice. I think they're afraid of us.
Yeah, I think I scared them off.
You scared them away there, Var, because you're a dick.
It's my fault.
But anyway, I'm trying to process Joha's statement on it. But the problem is that my concern is what happens when you're fighting both. What happens when there's civilians with guns, factions, sub-factions with guns, and then the infected join the party? It introduces a lot of vectors for failure. So, give me an example. What Joha is asking for people who have some context on YouTube is he's saying that I think the formation system should have two different modes for their logic. One against zombies, where they behave normally, like the one we know, and one against humans, so they understand the enemy doesn't melee, but shoots them. And the soldiers seek cover behind the vehicles or walls on the right side if the enemy shoots from the left side, as an example, and don't stay in line of sight for the shooting enemy. I don't know about that, because you figure, to me, that comes down to the concept of pausing the game and repositioning your units behind the cover in that instance. Because you figure there's a point to the game where I feel like I don't want to add too much automation, because then you're not playing the game anymore. Like when you're in that kind of encounter and that kind of battle, you're hands on. It's skins in the game. So when the game automates and does that level of basically like processing for you, I feel like you're not even playing the game anymore, and it also opens up the potential for failure, where it's like they're going to misdetect a situation, they're going to fight you by going into the wrong order position, and now they're out of position for the civilians, raiders that just snuck up behind you, but you were fighting the infected, so now all your units are dead. But in the intentionality of that moment, you would have set them in a certain way to move. The formation system is a starting point, is what I feel like. And as you play the game, you're going to have to make small course corrections to basically like grab this group, peel off, push the right. grab those 2 guys, push them up the right. Like, like use these abilities, move these guys to cover individually. And it's one of those things where like, I don't feel like the formation system should be a stopgap for every possibility. And it should just be the common denominator of getting you in a basic position to fight, to basically like get your units there. And then it's up to you to divvy them out and issue like individual orders or in subgroups or sub-formations on a per case basis kind of deal. When you start to automate it to that degree, you run into outstanding situations where you're going to fail because the game doesn't just. If you're fighting only infected, then I would advocate for what you're saying, but you're not. So you see there's a huge potential for failure in doing something that dynamic, and I feel like it takes away from actually managing and fighting in that battle per se. Because you made that conscious decision to move behind the Bradley. You got flanked. They died. That's your fault now, kind of deal. Instead of like, oh shit, I should have scouted that building rooftop. I should have sent a scout drone to watch my flank as I was advancing, so I knew to pause the game and reposition my right flank because another group was taking advantage of me in terms of like they chose to attack when I was already engaged. So like,
I feel no one uses
yeah.
scout drone.
What you saying?
I feel no one really ever uses scout drone.
I do, but yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's really invaluable. But I use helicopters and the little birds to scout my flank, so I know when people are coming to counteract me, or to like just go towards my base or whatever. But it's one of those things where it's like that is it's a very hard thing to solve, and I don't think there's a perfect solution. Like in terms of like the formations, I think that it's a starting point, and that you have to make the per case individual orders in that moment based off of the particulars of the situation. Yeah, but anyhow, what other questions do we have? Let's see for YouTube. So 3737 Lee asks co-op, and yes, we're working on co-op as we speak right now. That is ingrained in the current like stretch, or I guess you could say sprint, of getting this redo of the game situated. So everything that we're putting in after it's approved, after it's done, we are implementing co-op from the onset. So then that way, when we are done, co-op is in and you guys can play it, and there's no longer like a question mark in terms of when co-op kind of deal. So yeah, co-op is being worked on every single day, effectively. Let's see.
First, no one heard my cat just bitch at me.
Oh no, we don't have it. And then someone asked again, multiplayer or co-op. It's co-op right now, so it's a shared circ. And the idea, I'll just show it really super briefly. So let me save this map. I'm going to copy that map. And okay. So like if I go to like here and I go to here, 2, and then where'd that monitor go? Hold on. It's over there. So like here's co-op, where it's like, here's a little proof of a little co-op thing we've been building up. It's like if I go over here and I select these infantry, like you can see there's like tangible progress where like they're forming up and they're moving and they're doing all their logic and everything else. So like this is an example of like the formation system already supports co-op, and as we add every system and every mechanic into the game, it's being implemented to support co-op. So when we're done with this cleanup and this process, you guys can play co-op. So yeah, I know someone asked in the question in the channel about that, and it's been kind of like in limbo forever. And that was another big driving force behind this reboot, besides just cleaning up and auditing the whole project, is making sure that from the get-go, the game supports co-op. So like, let's say for instance, if I go over here to the host and I change it to ownership mode, the second client can't issue orders anymore. They can't select anyone. So if I select them, it's gray, which means I don't own this unit. But if I go to that unit, I think it's this guy. No, it's this one. And I gift him. Let me just put that away. It's blue now. or I can issue a remove order. Or maybe I can't. Okay, that's new. That's a new bug. So I guess that's a bug. Well, that was working before, but that's not working now. As I guess something was changed with the formation system to break that. But the idea is that there's a gifting system. If I give it back, can I move him? Oh, yeah. So it's some kind of authoritative issue with the gifting system that we're going to have to look into. Because if I gift it again, yeah, he doesn't move. Okay, well, that's new. But you figure that's going to kind of happen as we kind of tweak and alter the formation system, as we have to go back and check older systems just to make sure that they're all in synchronization and one change doesn't ripple down and change something else and retroactively break it. So let me write that down as a note. Okay, so we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. If there's any other questions, let's start to wrap this up, Duravar. We have 3 minutes officially, so let's get some good hard questions in, and then that way we can, go do your thing. Oh, someone's asking to ask a question on the voice. My God. I invited that guy to talk.
Hi, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What's your question?
Hey, thank you very much. Buddy, I just have a quick question because I know you guys are speaking about the co-op mode.
Yeah.
But I just unfortunately was able just to join now. And you guys say something about the campaign, how many quests we're gonna have, gonna be open world. It's just I make a lot of videos about Cepheus protocol, and I need something like new.
Oh, okay. So ultimately, when it comes down, you're talking about the campaign, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, the campaign is not going to be like the pandemic mode. It's completely different. So the idea is the campaign mode is more like XCOM or what was that alien game we were playing, Duravar?
Which one?
The RTS one.
Alien.
What?
Alien, yeah. Alien Dark Descent?
Yeah, that one, sorry. More like Dark Descent is the closest comparison that I would take, or StarCraft Wings of Liberty. But the idea is that the island that we're building on Alcatraz is going to be your main hub or your base of operations, and you're going to launch missions with a team, essentially. Because I don't want to take Pandemic and make it just a copy and paste of the campaign, and now you're just doing missions in the same areas. Like, there's going to be some areas that are going to be different and slightly altered, but there's going to be interiors. Like, you're going to be following the book, essentially, in terms of like the chain of events. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes it is. And I have the last question about it. The campaign gonna be cooperative?
We haven't talked about that yet, but it's very likely that we could look into that. Like, I don't have an answer on that yet. Right now, the campaign was supposed to be single player, but then at the time there wasn't really a big push on the co-op, and that plan was like 4 or 5 years ago. So it's one of those things where like, let me talk to Chris about that, and let me get closer to the point where we're working on the campaign, because right now I'm like 100% all in on Pandemic. And then when we get to the campaign, I'm going to take all the systems and all of the things that have been added that weren't in the original plan for campaign, and they're going to influence and change some things. So I could see that happening, but I need to talk to Chris, because he's the writer and the game designer, and figure out, like, are there any things that we need to kind of tweak and adjust to fit that framework? Does that make sense? So I don't have an answer yet, but I'm thinking about it, and I want to do it. I just got to talk to some people about that before I just jump into it. Any other questions?
Not from my side.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's get a couple more questions before we wrap it up.
All right, poor old Ice Money's been waiting for his question to get answered.
I am so sorry, Ice Money. Oh my God, just say his question.
I keep trying to give it to you, and you move on to the next.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I saw someone raise their hand, and we haven't heard anyone ever talk in this channel, I think in like 6 months. So I was like, my God, I hope he doesn't put his hand down. I have to grab him now. So go.
Can you just make it so this is probably referring to the formation stuff. Can you just make it so to where we can save unit positions to make custom formations similar to Total War that allows you to lock and move your army composition?
You can save move formations in Total War?
Yeah, sure.
Which one?
All of them. All the Total Wars.
What? Really?
Yeah, all the Total Wars. You can literally save unit formations and composition.
I've been playing those games for 20 years and I've never done that.
Next time we play Total War Warhammer 3, I'll show you.
Oh my God. I'm kind of depressed right now. We had an idea of doing that a long time ago. We abandoned it because we figured it was so hard to maintain and operate. I'll talk to my programmer on Monday and see what he thinks about that as well. Let me mull that over. I'm not gonna give a determination just yet, but that could be something that comes later down the pipe. But right now, I don't. There's a margin here, and the margin in my mind is what's absolutely essential and needed for like quality of life and changes, but not going too deep into the weeds to where we take 3 months like we did for civilian evacuation, where it offset the rest of the year. Because then you figure it took even longer. So like something like that is nice to have, but it's not mission critical. So like I would put that on a wish list, and I would say that instead of doing that, I would push ahead for the rest of the major line items and then come back to that after co-op is out and after everything else is baked into the game as like icing on the cake kind of deal. So let me talk to my programmer. Let me look at the code myself. Let me see what is entailed in doing something like that, because it's not a bad idea. And then, yeah, I'll let me get back to you on that one. But anyhow, what other questions do we have?
Imperial Japan asks when drone strikes will be available to us.
So the drone strikes that we have planned would be the Predator drone. I don't have an ETA on that. If I get my way and we have enough free time, I will sneak in at least 1 or 2 new like airplanes and jets, the modern equivalent of the Harrier and the Predator drone built from the aircraft carrier. But I don't know if I'm going to get my way and I'm going to be able to squeeze it in, because like we're using this Q1 cleanup to implement the game as the final version and not what's on Legacy. So we're putting the new doctrines in and we're not putting the old doctrines in. We're putting like the new generators in now and not just the starter generator in. So it kind of depends on the temperament of the community of like, do they want us to spend a little bit more time? Because again, it comes down to like, if people are like gung ho and they're accepting of like, hey, like maybe you should take another month and maybe focus on this or that. But I think like they can't make that determination until we get something they can tangibly play. Because right now you guys are just seeing things on a screen and you can't play it. You can't see how it feels. You can't break it. So I think that for some of these things, we'll make this determination as we get closer to a more viable thing that you guys can play. And we can make the decision as a group, because you guys have all kind of have a vested interest in terms of basically seeing the game through to its fruition of like, hey, you guys bought it. It's in early access. We need to deliver on the product, and we need to maintain some kind of like deadline, some kind of like system for like having it out in a timely fashion. But if there's enough demand, we can finesse and move some things around. But I feel like it has to be kind of a group consensus from Steam and Discord community to kind of have some like, okay, yeah, we kind of understand this. We'd like you to take more time on this. Or no, I don't think that's mission critical. I think that you should focus on the bare essentials of like what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, and then do those kind of things after co-op kind of deal. As like a, icing on the cake. So, hold on. Oh, you want me to show that, Michael?
Yeah, I just put it in real quick for you.
Oh, okay, hold on. So, Michael has been going through and redoing all the characters this week, and essentially giving them a fresh layer of paint of like, he made one of the girls so hyper polished and so like aesthetic, like, like really, I don't want to show that. That was my list from yesterday. But you figure essentially just kind of adding the detail and more fidelity to the texture sheets. So then that way we can just kind of get more detail in the faces and the armor and the aesthetics of the characters, from the operators to the RTS characters, because of all the things that he's learned working on the characters. So it's just one of those things where it's coming together really great, and him learning the best practices and how things work. He's been applying it to the assaults and everyone else. Everyone looks better across the board, and everyone looks like a AAA character from like,
the one on the right, by the way, is the new.
Yeah. So like here, let me see. I can zoom. Oh, I have to zoom in. So yeah, it's one of those things where he's just kind of finessing it and tweaking it. But let me go back to this, and then let's see if we can't wrap up the questions. So is there anything else that you want to hit upon for questions?
I think Marona asks, are we going to have command support voice in other language, but I'm not sure.
Is he talking about like
Yeah.
French for like when someone says like a unit's under attack?
Oh yeah, your unit's under attack. That's where they've just got their Spanish.
Not initially, no. All of that would be like right now we don't have the budget to do spoken other languages besides just like properly translating the text. Because I know that's been a big point of contention is the text for like Chinese, Russian, Ukrainian, French, German. So with this new revamp, the game is being programmed also in a way to just kind of make that more like the flow better and make it more like easier to translate. So once we get like everything playable, I'm gonna go off into a corner and pay for the translations for all the text. Then I wouldn't say I don't even know when we would do voiceover for other languages besides English because I know some indie games never even get around to that. Like as far as I know, like let me look up some. I think like Kenshi and like They Are Billions and all them. I think they only do written because it's just so hard to do. Let me see. Oh no, Kenshi has a full audio. I just looked on their store page. I don't know. It's one of those things where I have to kind of look into because if we're making enough money to facilitate that, I'll do it. But for right now, it's gonna have to stay text only for the time being, and English is the primary spoken language, just because of the resources that we have as being an indie team that's self-funded. Okay, so any other questions before we wrap it up? Anything hard? Anything else you want to throw into the ring before we wrap this up?
I think that's all the questions.
Let me check YouTube. Hold on.
Yeah, just quickly check YouTube.
Red Phoenix asks, how many players are planned for co-op? The first internal play test is going to be 4. We're going to see how far we can push that for operators. I've mentioned this here and there on and off, and I'll mention it again, is that I want to see if we can push the game up to having at least 10 to 12 operator-only players that buy in and get parachuted in when they die from barracks, having like a global respawn where when you die as an operator, it pulls you out, and you're able to basically choose a barracks to resupply in on the next reinforcement wave, and you just choose whatever operator you're going to respond with, kind of like Call of Duty or Battlefield. I have to stress test that, and I have to see how well that is going to be balanceable, because having that many operators in the world might require us to have dedicated servers almost instead of having listen servers for the sheer amount of data that's going to be going and sent over the internet. So that's something that I'm going to look into, and I need to test. So like when we get to the point of having our first test, I'll probably just invite a bunch of people like our Patreons. And if we need extra people, I'll grab them off the public Discord, and we'll fill a room, and we'll basically try and see how high of a player count we can do, and go from there. Because I don't know until we play test it, in terms of like, getting it up to like Silica of like 18 to 20 players, where like 4 hybrids. Those 4 can switch between RTS and TPS anytime they want. And then the other 16 or 12 or 14 or whatever are like the TPS third person operators only. So that way you can get all your Call of Duty and your Battlefield and then your like more casual friends to play with you and boss them around, while the other people that are more like strategic RTS or from a top-down perspective, commanding them. Like you can almost see the RTS players as the commanders, and the TPS players as the subordinates, or like the boots on the ground almost. That's the way I kind of see it. And then having some kind of merging of roles of like what I talked about previously, where like after I get this structure system in a place where I'm happy, I'm going to go in and add in the blueprinting system so operators can build the same way that an RTS player could. So it's just one of those things where it's going to just kind of be like, or we're going to keep rolling with the punches and implementing as we go. But yeah, it's going to be fun. I personally am counting the days every fucking day until the point where we can sit down and we can actually play it. Like last night was the first realization where it's like, oh, like the buildings are in. Like, it's only like a teensy bit more functionally internally to where we can actually have combat. And then a little bit, and then like maybe another couple of like half a week to a week until it's humanly digestible to be like average consumer that don't need console commands and other things like respawn infected and like keep a combat loop going so you can stress test the AI. So like it's getting to a point where it's like, oh, like you're starting to see the glimmers of like actual game, and that gets me excited. It gets everyone else on the team excited because you can start to see it all coming together again, and coming together in a better way, as you guys have heard from the examples that I gave earlier tonight about some of the shortcomings of Legacy versus the newer version. So yeah, I personally can't wait, and it's one of those things where like I've been basically just going ham every day on, just waking up, working on the game, going to sleep, maybe fitting in 1 or 2 hours of a TV show to try and get it in and as fast as possible to get it to where you guys can play it and it's back to where it can be. And I'll feel better about just generally like, okay, like I can actually sit down and play a game again in terms of co-op. Because me and Michael talk about this and joked about this for months on and off, where it's like, it'd be a great thing if him and I could just play our game in co-op right now. We're sitting in a room sometimes at midnight trying to figure out what game are we going to play as co-op. Are we going to buy that game? Or are we going to, go do this or that? And him and I will just, every once in a while, be like, fuck, I kind of wish our game was co-op. Because it's our game. So we could play it all day. And if we don't like something, tweak something, adjust something, add this feature in, put that new weapon in. So it's one of those things where it's like, to be able to get to that point of having an interoperability of all the systems and the maintenance of like being able to put in new content, like I showed you, the pipeline, and then having it to where you can play with your friends and they're all game developers, is going to be a very great thing for like a feedback loop of positive reinforcement of like putting in more content and pushing the game and like having, more nuance to some mechanics and systems. Because we can just be like, hey, I'm going to go do building, and Michael, you're going to go take a squad, or you're going to go play Call of Duty by yourself, and I want you to clear out grid A, B, and C. I'll build the base, and in 5 to 10 minutes, I'll send over a Sky Crane, or not Sky, like a Chinook or a Black Hawk, drop some troops down, fortify and build, move on to the next grid. Michael gets into a situation where he needs help. You can basically send in a bunch of Black Hawks or infantry and supplement, like, he's by himself. So, because Michael plays more of like TPS, first person shooters. And he plays RTS, but he doesn't play it as much. I have to like pull his arm to play RTS lately. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's the perfect, like, I guess you could say middle ground of bringing all your friends together in Cepheus and everyone's happy kind of deal. So I can't wait. Like literally, that is literally what keeps me up in terms of like getting it to that point again and having it to where I can torture my friends to play it all the time. I fear for their lives. So...
Oh no, you should definitely fear because when
you're
we
gonna
play
fucking friendly fire me every time.
I've
So
got
like,
to
fuck
friendly
you.
fire the shit out of you.
You're gonna airstrike me every time I leave the goddamn base. So I don't want to play.
Yep. There will be a airstrike on your ass every single time.
Yeah, pretty much.
You'll be like, you'll be like, help! I need help. Where are you? Airstrike you.
Airstrike the entire city block. Oh, you were at that city block? Oh, I'm so sorry. But everyone's dead now, so when you respawn, you're good.
You're good, you can go back. You can walk back in there. It's
This
clear.
is my torment of playing a co-op game. I fear for when I play Helldivers of him tonight. Like,
Oh yes.
yeah, God help me.
Oh. Now that I know that the recoilless rifle has a HD mode, I'm gonna make sure that you're as close as possible to the charges.
This is the shit I gotta deal with. This is the shit I gotta deal with.
Yep.
Oh Lord. But yeah, so I mean it's gonna be fun. And I think that it's going to be well worth the wait in terms of like it's been a long time coming and we've had our trials and tribulations. But I think that over the last couple of years we've shown that we're willing to put in the work, talk to the community, and when we make a mistake, we will say we made a mistake. And we will say that we were wrong and we will correct it, or be willing to listen to the community and be like, make an adjustment here and tweak this and do that. So I think that willingness to, sorry, my dog is attacking a dog bone in the background, is to basically like, willingness to kind of like figure it out is a great thing to kind of move forward and keep just kind of pushing the game in a better, more healthy area for everyone, for us from a developer standpoint, and you guys as the end consumer of having an enjoyable game as fun to play. Because at the end of the day, that's all we want. is a game that you guys just want to play. You don't want to stop playing it, and it's fun to play. Like it's your experience of your environment, however you want to play it every time, like customizing it and whatnot. And it's getting it to that point and adding the right amount of customization so you guys can have your own custom, situations and whatnot. Is there anything you want to add, Michael? Because I know you never come to these because you're hiding because of your day job. Like, I don't know. You never get a chance to talk anymore. Or did he die? Yeah, he's dead. Okay, well then that's it then. I will end it there. Thank you guys so much for coming to the podcast. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to sit in and basically answer your questions, see what kind of progress we have. I know that hundreds of you watches VODs after the fact. We appreciate you guys taking the time to just kind of follow along and see what's being done, giving your feedback on the comments. Like if there's something that you're concerned about, something you want to talk about, come to the podcast, talk to us, raise your hand, talk in the actual mic section of things and voice your concerns. Like as long as it's respectful and we can have a conversation, I don't have any problem with like you not agreeing with my stance on things. Like we're not going to always agree, but we don't have to. Like the game design and game things are some things are very subjective and nuanced. So it's like your perspective and my perspective are different. And sometimes we can find a middle ground. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes it has to be done later down the road based off of resources. But I'm at least willing to hear what you guys have to say and earmark it for the future in some cases. And again, if you guys want to support development, feel free to check out our Patreon or check out the support packs on Steam. Pledge on Discord, and all the other fun stuff. And you guys have a great night, and we will see you guys next week. And if you want to be ingrained in like what's going on a daily basis and like leave questions and concerns, join the Discord and check out the reports, the daily updates blog, because I post on it every hour sometimes. Derek posts on it maybe once a day, and it's primarily for the programmers, because primarily it's the programming right now that needs to just kind of get everything up to snuff so we can play the game again. So that's kind of our way of showing the transparency of what we're doing, what kind of issues we're running into. And sometimes you'll get more details and more technical details on like what's going on in a day over a span of hours in there than I would give here, considering me Dane, and sometimes I fix things in a matter of like 10 to 20 minutes and I don't even mention it in a podcast. So that's it. And is there anything you want to add, Derivar, if we run away and go play Helldivers? All right. Thank you guys so much.